A Bit Lit, celebrating research and creativity of all kinds.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for joining me for A Bit Lit.
Hi, thanks for having me, Emma.
You're very welcome. So I was wondering, could you start off by just telling us a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Laura Wright. I'm an early modernist teaching at University College, Oxford at the moment. And I'm working on a book on sound effects and thinking about the practicalities of theatrical performance in the early modern period. I'm also involved with creation theatre, and I'm currently directing a production of The Witch of Edmonton, which is bringing together sort of two sides of my interests, because that is, of course, also an early modern play, the sort of thing that I regularly teach and love to teach.
Oh, fantastic. And could you tell us a bit more about how you, as a kind of early modernist, got involved with creation theatre and what drew you to this play in particular out of all the amazing range of early modern plays you could be directing?
Absolutely. I first started working with Creation, who are a local Oxford company, through a fund opportunity. I got in touch and said, I really want to work more on Shakespeare and Fletcher's Henry VIII. We play some scenes. Could we experiment and do some performances research? And that ended up becoming a production, which, because of the pandemic, very rapidly became an online reading. And since then, I've stayed in touch with Creation and directed The Duchess of Malfi, and now The Witch of Edmonton. I didn't answer the second part of that.
That's
there.
fine. No, but go ahead. So yeah,
well,
so I mean, obviously you've had some experience with tragedies with the Duchess of Malfi before, but was there anything in particular about the Witch of Edmonton that drew you to it?
Yes, I mean, I love the Witch of Edmonton, but I always felt that Witch of Edmonton was in some ways diluted by the three plot lines that it's trying to weave together. So there are sort of three major stories with Witch of Edmonton. There's a bigamy plot, a man marrying two wives. There's a comic plot about Morris dancers, and then there's a plot about the witch herself and her relationship with the devil. And whenever I've taught it, I've often found that trying to manage those three things becomes very difficult. And in some ways, what I wanted was to carve out a version of Witch of Edmonton that was focusing on the ostracized witch, quote, big quotes around witch there, and think about what it would mean to play this more firmly as domestic tragedy and leave the dancing comedy out of it. And digital theatre is a great way to do that, because it can be very intense, very focused, and intimate in a way that I wanted to play with.
Oh, that's fascinating. And there's so much to unpick there. So maybe I'll start with the fact that, yeah, so you said that you're wanting to kind of narrow down the plot lines. And obviously it's a co-authored play by three different authors. And in taking out that sort of the Morris dancing plot line, which, as you say, it's kind of comic, it's showing the devil running riot in Edmonton in a way that produces hilarity as well as destructive things. So did you feel that we're kind of getting closer to the actual sort of true story that it's based on, of this woman accused of witchcraft, by stripping back those other elements?
That's it, isn't it? This is a true story. It's the first thing we said in the rehearsal rooms. You know, we're going to play with this, we're going to experiment, we're going to have fun, but at the same time, we're going to remember that this is a real witch hunt. This is a real woman accused of murder, but also accused of witchcraft. The murder, perhaps; the witchcraft, I think, less likely. That idea that she's scapegoated, ultimately executed by her community, that fascinates me. Which is not to, I'm not damn Morris dancing. That is fun and really interesting in its own way, but it wasn't something I thought would translate very well to Zoom anyway as a medium. It's all about motion and joy and excitement and music, and those things can be quite difficult to stage in digital theatre. But yeah, for me, it's about Elizabeth Sawyer. It's about this older woman who is persecuted, and the parallel storyline to that is this story of Frank, his two wives, and ultimately, can you spoiler alert a 400-year-old play? I don't know, but spoiler
I think
alert.
We can and we should, yeah.
Yeah, and the violence that he enacts as well.
And that's so interesting. So we'll come back maybe in a minute to what you were saying about what works best for Zoom, because I think that's a really exciting question. But I just wanted to pick up a bit more on what you were saying about the fact that, as you pointed out, that it's a true story, but then as a contemporary audience, we're less likely to believe in the magic that's an element of how the story was told as truth in the period. So how have you approached attempting to recreate an early modern worldview where a man being, arrested for bigamy and murder and a woman being arrested for witchcraft were both kind of equally legal crimes, and the supernatural was sort of part of the worldview and part of the everyday? How are you approaching making that something that a kind of contemporary audience can enter into?
That's really interesting. We've talked a lot in rehearsal. We've been trying to get to the core of what drives people to make irrational choices that they believe to be rational. A lot of the actions that we have, I'm thinking of a character called Carter who is screaming at the witch and he's driving up his land. When we're trying to figure out what on earth motivates this man to treat this vulnerable woman this way, we're thinking, what beliefs that people cling to, whether or not they can be sort of supported by facts. Those sort of what are his morals? What are his principles? We talked a lot about a kind of absolute morality being the order of the day in Edmonton. What is right, and what is wrong, and there's no nuance or grey area there. And that being, I suppose, a modern day equivalent to the sort of superstition that we see in 1621, what it means to sort of really hold firm to your beliefs in the face of all kind of counter evidence.
It's really interesting. So sort of the idea that these characters are wedded to a worldview where there's good and evil is straightforward because it's caused by the devil and it causes witchcraft, and we can see that kind of the effect of witchcraft in the physical world around us, and it becomes a kind of way of making sense of that. How does thinking about Elizabeth Sawyer's role kind of fit into that? Because I know that when I'm teaching early modern witch trials to my students, they're always coming up against the idea of, okay, other people condemned women for transgressive things and used kind of transgressive feminine behaviors and used witchcraft as a kind of framework for blaming them for those things. But why did the women themselves confess? How do we think our way into a woman admitting to witchcraft in this period? I suppose in a way the play makes that easy by having us all see the literal devil that appears to Elizabeth Sawyer. But I wondered if you had any more thoughts about that.
Absolutely. I have made tweaks to the script. I'm always a little bit irreverent about the early modern text. And there are a couple of things that I've done to try and create parallels between our own moment, everyday experience of women's testimony being ignored, women's living being overlooked. So there are a couple of things. One is that I wanted to say, this is not an obscure case. This is something that happens, across the country. It happens in other countries. The idea that Elizabeth Sawyer is not. So one of the things that I've done, in fact, that we're in the middle of filming at the minute, is to have other witches reading aloud the reports of their trials. So it's not women themselves confessing. It's not first person. It's not I've done these things. It's women reading the things they were accused of in the voice of the men who kept records of that. So that will break up the text. Will come in and out of those stories as we move through. And then Elizabeth Sawyer, the witch, is going to do the same for herself at the end of the play, drawn that from a pamphlet written by Henry Goodcole. He was witness to the trial and to her questions and answers. So for me, it was really important to put more women's voices in, even though those voices are often really annoying or upsetting. And of course, with the caveat, it's not really their voices. It's what other people have described. It's what they're accused of. As I say, we're in the middle of filming and it's really rich and really interesting. And I think that's going to help to make this not just a one-off strange event, but actually, this is how women are often treated when they speak up.
Absolutely. That sounds really powerful. And I think that's a really helpful kind of caveat to keep in mind with the question I was just thinking about, of that question of why women were confessing, that you're quite right, that what we have are not the confessions, the women's voices. They're the kind of women's voices mediated and framed by the the men asking the questions, the men writing these things down, the accusers, who could often be men. And I think that's a fascinating choice, to have the contemporary actors reading those voices and those accusations, to give us a sense of the sort of wider climate in which Elizabeth Sawyer's kind of experiences are taking place. And I guess my follow-up question is, you've given me a really sort of enticing vision of how you're going to be framing Elizabeth herself and her voice. How are you staging the devil who appears to her in the form of the dog? Because I feel like that's a fascinating character, in that he is a dog. He is also a devil. He sometimes behaves like a dog. He sometimes behaves like a devil. He can be hilarious. He can be utterly terrifying. And I mean, even attempting to imagine how he would have been performed in an early modern theatre is quite difficult. So it's even more sort of exciting, but also presumably challenging, to think about how he'd be staged on Zoom. So what are you thinking there? Or is that too much of a spoiler?
No, I mean, I can certainly talk about the sort of work in progress, and some of the experiments we've been having over the last week. My first sort of serious point about the dog was the dog should not be a pantomime dog. You know, this is, I think I said something like, not a sort of Nana from Peter Pan type dog, you know, something that was clearly not natural, and something that slipped between the human and the animal in a way that suggests kind of shape shifting that we see associated with the devil. As of right now, we're making the most of our technology. So we're playing with black lights, with UV light, to highlight certain parts of the dog at certain moments. Also playing with point of view through various cameras. So sometimes we'll see the dog, but sometimes we'll see as the dog.
Oh, amazing. And I guess that's the thing that in early modern playhouses, you can kind of play a lot with the kind of dramaturgy and who's talking to the audience at various points, and whose perspective we're inhabiting because of who's talking to us. But you can't look through a character's eyes. So that's a really exciting thing that Zoom can kind of bring to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we come up with sort of camera rules when we Zoom. So sort of we'll discuss, okay, what can some characters do with the lens that others can't? So for instance, in this production, Elizabeth is the one who can speak to the audience, have this sort of physical intimacy. I mean, you can see coming close to the kind of relationship we have with the camera. So that's what the witch can do, because she's the one who has who's in this play. She's the one who get the kind of most insight into her kind of inner life. The dog is periphery. The dog is moving through screen. Not something we can ever touch. He's not tangible to us, because he's the devil, and we're not in control of our relationship with him. So hopefully, when that all comes together next week, then that will look suitably spooky.
And that is fascinating, because I feel like one of the things I really love about plays from this period are how they play with space. And that's one thing that you can't have embodiment and space on Zoom, and that is a thing you lose. But actually, here, listening to you talk about it, you can still play with proximity, you can still play with point of view, and actually you're suggesting some really exciting ways that Zoom and different camera work can do something different to a stage, but that creates similar kind of spatial dynamic. And I mean, so in a way, you've already answered the question I was going to ask, but there might be more you want to say about, I mean, obviously creation theatre as Zoom pioneers. I think the first Zoom play I ever saw was in lockdown, when I saw their Tempest. And it was so exciting to get that sense of aliveness that even though I couldn't be in a theatre and actually sit alongside other people, I could sometimes see the audience, I could sometimes interact, I could see different points of view, and I felt like I was at the theatre again. So do you feel this play is sort of building on that expertise that creation have built up over the pandemic as they've kind of transitioned to Zoom?
Absolutely. I mean, creation's strength has been that they have experimented. Every production has been different. It's had a different way of using the digital space. This production, it's drawing on lessons learned. My lessons learned from working on Alfie and Henry VIII, but also the far greater wealth of amongst the cast and crew who are working day in and day out at creation. And yes, we're acquiring a kind of bank of knowledge, but we're also still playing, and I think that's really crucial. We're also doing something for this production that we weren't doing for Duchess of Malfi, which is we can sometimes be in the same room now. Whereas, of course, that wasn't possible during lockdown. So, for instance, yesterday we were filming a couple of insert shots in a studio in Bicester, which allows our actors to touch, to interact in a way that is fascinating, having not been able to do that before. So
that's really exciting.
Yeah, the rules are shifting. It's different every time.
Yeah, and I imagine that in a Zoom production, because we've become used to the kind of the separate squares as an audience, moments of touch where the actors can actually touch have a kind of heightened tension and excitement around them. And I mean, yeah, I could keep interrogating you about this all day because I think it's so interesting. But I'm aware that we want to keep this at a length that is easily watchable by our audience. So what I might do now is shift to asking you the question we ask all a bit lit guests when they come on, which could relate perhaps to the production you've been talking about, which is, what is literature?
Oh, the big questions, Emma.
I know, nice and manageable.
Yeah, thinking in terms then of this play, it's, I suppose, for me, it's a way of negotiating the same narrative, the same story from different perspectives. That's what's been fascinating about Witch of Edmonton, right? It's a true crime. It's a real thing that happened, or at least parts of it happened, and certainly there was an execution. Yeah. But then it's playing with narrative. So the brilliance of this play is actually allowing for the possibility that Elizabeth Sawyer is a really difficult, unpleasant woman, and yet not, evil incarnate. That the people of Edmonton are and angry and fearful, but also, have complex relationships and love their family and look after each other. And by playing with these narratives and by, sort of mashing different things together, I guess for me, it's a composite. That's what literature is. It's a mashup of stories that we talk about and we play with and we analyze, and that's not really an answer, is it? But it's
a great answer. And I feel like, I feel like it could fit into sort of wider debates we're having in society at the moment about, becoming a more polarized world. And what you're suggesting is a play like this is actually providing kind of the subtlety and the complexity and the nuance of the characterization, where you can't straightforwardly villainize any character or group of characters, even if that's what they're trying to do to each other.
Absolutely. And even if we quite literally have a woman, signing a contract with the devil, I mean, it doesn't, on paper, it doesn't seem like it could get any simpler, but actually, of course, that's not what the play's doing. It's allowing for the possibility that we're all a bit bad and a bit good. Surely the nuance is the interesting part.
Yeah, completely. And I feel like what you said about it being a true crime play is also quite important to that, because I know you mentioned earlier that it's a domestic tragedy, which for people who don't know is sort of a play that's taking the ordinary non-elite worlds of ordinary people and making it worthy of the dramatic reach of tragedy, often with a true crime basis. And it's sort of making me think about all the true crime dramas that are around at the moment. So I've been watching Inventing Anna on Netflix, and the kind of the complexity of taking real world figures and recent events and kind of giving them that complexity and nuance. And I think you're so right that what's kind of exciting and radical about this play is that it not only succeeds in doing that, but it does that with someone who's you're right, signing a contract with the devil is the definition of evil, the definition of being kind of irredeemably evil in the kind of the worldview of this play and this period. And yet the playwrights are sort of exploring the social factors that led to a woman doing that in a way that suggests broader sympathies. But sorry, I can feel myself wanting to continue the conversation now, and I know it's probably time to wrap it up. But before we do, would you mind explaining how those of us who wish to could go about buying tickets to this Creation Theatre production?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, firstly, please do. It's running, we've got dates now from the 9th to the 20th of March. And you can go online to Creation Theatre's website and you can book a ticket for a device. And then, anyone who wants to join you can watch on that device. So we can have, you can have a viewing party, you can have people round. And it's running for about an hour. So, comfy seat, watch the play, should be good fun. And we've got a couple of late nights as well for anyone who is in North America, or that it'll make more sense for their time zone to be able to join us a little bit later in the evening too. Yeah,
Fantastic.
so Creation Theatre's website, Witch of Edmonton, and you can book.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing the details for that. And thank you for chatting about this really fascinating production, which, I mean, the way it's interweaving different experiences of women accused of witchcraft in early modern England around this fascinating play just sounds so exciting. And I can't wait to watch it.
Thank you so much, Emma.